You know, most of us use the words cemetery and graveyard pretty much interchangeably. But what if I told you they're not the same thing at all? Turns out their separate histories tell this really fascinating story about public health, religion, and how our entire relationship with death has changed over time.
So, let's start with the big question. Do you actually know the real difference? I'm guessing maybe not. But stick with me, because by the end of this, you'll not only know the answer, but you'll get why that difference actually matters.
All right, here's our roadmap. We're going to start way back with the ancient church graveyard. Then we'll see how a major crisis gave birth to the modern cemetery. After that, we'll dive into the differences today, take a peek at the surprising business side of things, and finally look at the incredible future of our final resting places. For centuries, literally for over 1,000 years, the story of burial was completely tied to one single institution, the church. And that's exactly where the story of the graveyard begins. You know, the word graveyard itself is super direct. It comes from an old Proto-Germanic word, graben, which just means to dig. It's a purely functional name, a yard for graves. And the key thing is, it was almost always located right there on the property of a church.
And this is the point you really have to get. Starting way back in the 7th century, the church had a total and complete monopoly on death. If you wanted a proper Christian burial, it had to be on their sacred ground. There was no other option.
But that system, which had worked just fine for centuries, was about to run into a crisis it just couldn't handle. With the Industrial Revolution, cities exploded, and these little church graveyards turned into a genuine public health nightmare. You can practically see the pressure building here, right? For ages, the church is in control. Then, in the 18th century, cities just boom, and the graveyards get dangerously packed. Around the same time, this Miasma Theory takes hold. This widespread belief that bad air rising from the graves was spreading diseases like cholera. Something had to give. And in 1831, the solution finally arrived. The very first rural cemetery, built way outside the city.
And let me tell you, people were genuinely terrified. The language they used back then was intense. They really saw these old graveyards as toxic threats to the living, calling them receptacles of putrefying matter. That fear is what really drove the push for change. So this new kind of burial ground needed a new name, and they chose cemetery, which comes from the Greek word koimeterion, and it means a sleeping place. Now, that contrast is totally on purpose. It shifts the whole idea away from the blunt graveyard to something much more peaceful and serene. Now, this is the part that kind of blows my mind. Before we had places like Central Park, these brand new rural cemeteries were America's first public parks. Seriously, they were designed to be beautiful, with gardens and walking paths. Families would go there on weekends for picnics and to just take a stroll. It was a total destination.
Okay, so that whole historical split is what created the fundamental differences we still see today. So let's jump into the present and look at the real-world divide between a graveyard and a cemetery. On the surface, it's pretty simple. A graveyard? It's attached to a church. It's usually smaller, more confined, and often it's just for members of that specific church. A cemetery, on the other hand, isn't tied to a church. It's usually much, much larger, and it's generally open to anyone.
And when you dig a little deeper, the operational differences are even clearer. A church runs the graveyard. A city or a private company runs the cemetery. That affects the rules, too. Graveyards tend to have pretty strict conservative rules for headstones, while cemeteries often allow for a lot more flexibility and creativity. And just look at the layout. Graveyards can be kind of informal and clustered, while cemeteries are meticulously planned out with organized plots and pathways.
So you can probably guess that running a modern cemetery isn't just about finding a plot of land. Oh no, it is a complex, highly regulated business that's designed to last for centuries.
Yeah, you can't just buy a field and start a cemetery. It's a real business that has to navigate this whole maze of government oversight. We're talking about incorporating as a legal entity, getting a license from a state cemetery board, following all sorts of environmental, land use rules, and even complying with consumer protection laws on pricing. So you might be wondering, how does a cemetery stay perfectly maintained 100 years from now? The secret is something called perpetual care. When you buy a plot, a piece of that money is legally required to go into a special protected trust fund. The cemetery can only use the interest earned by that fund for maintenance. It's a system designed to make sure the grounds are cared for, well, perpetually.
But the story doesn't stop there. Not by a long shot. Just like the 19th century saw that massive shift, we're in the middle of another huge evolution right now, and this one is being driven by environmentalism and technology.
And listen, this is not some fringe movement anymore. The data is crystal clear. A 2023 report found that a full 60% of people are now actively exploring green funeral options. That's a massive shift in how we think about our impact on the planet even after we're gone.
So what exactly is a green burial? Well, it's basically a return to how things used to be done. It means no harsh embalming chemicals. It means using a biodegradable casket made of something like wicker, or even just a simple shroud. The whole point is to let the body decompose naturally and return to the earth with the smallest possible environmental footprint.
And if you want to see the next step in sustainability, look no further than human composting. The technical term is natural organic reduction. This process gently and quickly transforms remains into nutrient-rich soil, which can then be given back to the family to use in a garden or to help restore a forest.
And of course, technology is changing how we remember people. We're now seeing QR codes pop up on headstones. Anyone with a smartphone can scan it and be instantly linked to a rich online memorial filled with photos, videos, and detailed life stories. It turns a static piece of stone into a living, interactive tribute. Which really brings us to the final, big question. We've gone from the small church graveyard to the sprawling park-like cemetery, and now to green burials and digital legacies. The way we handle death has always been a mirror, reflecting the values of the living. So, as our own values about family, technology, and the environment continue to change, how will we choose to be remembered?
Don't forget to like and subscribe for more How Meets History.